Uh, Welcome to session 16. Next, we've got Molly Ford-Williams. Molly is a graphic and communication design student at the University of Leeds in the UK. At the beginning of this year, she wrote a wonderful article called Go Hack Yourself, and we're very lucky to have her here with us today to present on that subject. If you have any questions for Molly, please tweet them with the hashtag ID24. But for now, take it away, Molly.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon and good morning and good evening to everyone. Before I speak, I'd like to say a big thank you to... Oh, it's lagging on my... Oh no, I've got it open. I'm so sorry, everyone. I had it open and it was lagging. Let me start again. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. Before I start, I'd like to say a big thank you to Mike, Henny, Billy, and the rest of the Passiello group for inviting me to speak. This is my first time presenting ever, and hopefully what I'm going to talk about will raise some interesting questions and start a few discussions about inclusive UX design practice, empathy, and design research. I apologise in advance, but this presentation may run for less than 45 minutes. It's based on a much shorter blog post that I wrote earlier in the year, so I've hopefully added some extra relevant thoughts and observations beyond what was in the original post. So hello, I'm Molly Ford-Williams. I'm a graphic communication design student from the University of Leeds in England. I've just finished a placement year in industry with a couple of design agencies in Manchester, and I'll be finishing my 4-year degree in 2018 when I'll finally be in the real world. I've become increasingly interested in user experience design and accessibility, both because my brother has cerebral palsy, and also it's becoming apparent to me that accessible UX design is good UX design in general, and it's not a bolt-on or an afterthought. I also believe that accessibility is also about everyone, but I'll explain more about that as I go along. So in this presentation, I will be exploring both the differences and similarities between temporary and lifelong challenges and the circumstances that disable all of us. And as part of our design processes, some simple ways we can hack ourselves to emulate those physical, sensory and cognitive challenges, both from the disability and circumstantial perspective. And for good measure, I'll throw in a few UX examples I've come across that I think add value from specific inclusive UX perspectives. So for starters, here's my disclaimer. What I'm going to talk about is not in any way scientific. It's just a collection of initial observations, thoughts, and suggestions I've accumulated over the last couple of years. Some of it has come from observed behaviours and some from features that are already part of the products we use every day. And the rest just sounds like common sense to me anyway. So before I get into detail, I'd like to pose a question that I often ask myself. What is a model human being? Speaking as a designer, it is easy to fall into a trap of designing for yourself, or even designing for what I have depicted here, the standard issue modern family that we see all too frequently on TV. For designs to really work, they need to embrace the fact that there is a rich variety in the model of human, and that this model changes permanently over time and can also be challenged temporarily due to circumstance or as an effect of its environment. So as a designer, thinking as broadly as possible and testing the tolerance of our work against a wider range of personas and circumstances, we can ensure the broadest possible audience reach and opportunities for use. At this point, I'd like to bring in a couple of interesting perspectives that have helped me shape my thinking. Now, this is Dieter Rams, a German industrial designer famous for his product designs for Braun in the 1960s and his influence on Jonathan Ives and Apple's design ethos in general. And I quote, "Indifference towards people and the reality in which they live is actually the one and only cardinal sin in design. Now, when Dieter said this about design, he hit on a really important point, that we all live our lives differently due to our uniqueness, and that this means that we all need or prefer to undertake tasks in different ways. The second quote is from Jamie Knight from the BBC, from a presentation that I've seen him give a couple of times on cognitive accessibility. And I quote again, "Impairment plus environment equals disability." Now, Jamie uses this to explain the social model of disability, and on his website, Spaced Out and Smiling, he goes on to say, and I quote, "When you have someone who is impaired or different and you place them into a badly designed environment, the environment disables them. This is a really important point, and I'm not disabled, but when the environment is badly designed, I am disabled by it, and this is known as the social model of disability." And I thought that was really cool. So both of these statements in combination got me thinking, sometimes the impairment may not be personal, but circumstantial or environmental. And that maybe we are all to a greater or lesser degree impaired all of the time through a combination of the situation we find ourselves in and the tasks we are trying to undertake. To best explain this thought, here are a couple examples I hope we can all relate to. Carrying a baby is a good starter. If you know anything about babies or hairy babies such as cats and dogs and gerbils, you'll know that sometimes either they don't want to be put down, they cannot be put down as they are asleep, or you don't want to put them down because they are trying to escape in unsafe circumstances. And in all these situations, you might only have one hand or even just your voice to control a device or an app. This is a type of situational physical impairment. I don't think this is controversial, but how rarely do we use an app to the exclusion of everything else? We can be walking, holding a conversation, watching TV, all kinds of things that need our attention. And in these cases, the designer needs to appreciate that we might not be 100% focused on the tasks we are trying to undertake on our devices. In these situations, we are mildly to moderately cognitively impaired. There are also lots of situations where we are hearing impaired. People are using social networks while at work or in public spaces. They are watching video on demand services such as Netflix or BBC iPlayer, or are holding conversations whilst watching TV. I'm sure there are plenty more scenarios that we can think of. And in these situations, either the sound is interrupted by other people's speech, which means we have to turn the sound down so we might miss some of what is said, or there is no sound at all. So I hope those illustrate what we all experience, that we all experience accessibility challenges as a natural part of our lives, and our ability to access is often affected by our current circumstance. I also need to add that this will change during our lifetime, sometimes quite suddenly and unexpectedly due to sickness, injury, and also as a natural part of our aging process. So disability can be both permanent and transient at the same time. Putting all that together, I started to think that impairment was not only about disability, and I say that with quote marks, but it is about this combination. The range of capability in all humans, the transience of that capability, the combination of barriers or features in devices, platforms, and products, the complexity or logic employed in any task we are asking other humans to complete, the environment they are attempting to complete the task in, and their current circumstance. Are they stationary, carrying stuff, running, dancing? They could either be sat on the loo. I mean, that's pretty gross to use your phone on the loo, but you know, some people do it. This all seems valid, but very complicated. I realised the need to emulate as many of these challenges as possible, but started to wonder how far I could take the emulation as to get a real feel and understanding of what was best practice and why it was considered so. And I had to start with what I already knew and then build upon that. Before I could get stuck into the task, I had to consider that as a designer, there are 3 areas of design consideration for accessibility that I needed to take into account. Each of these are based on my current level of understanding of UX design and what I have learned and identified so far as best practice. The first is ensuring that every part of the design works in different sensory modes. So if you can't hear it, you can see it, and if you can't see it, you can hear it, etc. This is to some degree already employed in design language when we hear different sounds of alerts for different apps on our phones, and when we check the screen and we get all the different app alerts that are visually identifiable. The iPhone also has a great setting that flashes the light as an alert, like the old visual strobe light doorbells. The other more obvious accessibility related example is when all text can be seen and accessed by a screen reader, but I'm not sure if this is considered by every designer, but maybe I'm wrong. The second is supporting different input or control methods for every design. The four basic ones are touchscreen, keyboard, switch, and pointing device. To some degree, switch can be covered by keyboard on a PC or Mac, but this can be rather limiting approach for switch users, and on mobile devices there is greater OS level support, but a question about how many users know that I'm really bad at writing, I'm just reading my notes. But a question about how many users know that it's there, basically. Designers seem to default to mouse and screen, and the keyboard seems to be less of a consideration, and switch still seems to be an afterthought at best. On iOS, again, this should be changing because of the increased support for switch devices, switch recipes, and using the screen as one big switch. The third is about supporting native accessibility. If the designers and developers get the first two right, then ensuring the product supports every accessible option or feature of the devices and platforms it appears on will enable more accessibility savvy designers to be more inclusive in their design approach. I've already mentioned switch features, for example. I'm sorry if you can hear my dog in the background. This is a simple idea that users set their devices up so they are accessible to them, and that the products designed for them on those platforms respond to those choices. I have noticed, however, that there is still a great deal of duplication happening with sites offering customizable fonts, colors, or even speech output. And customization and accessibility features can be added, but just make sure they don't duplicate what is already available, as it can end up clashing and breaking the UX. I'd like to add that that it's becoming increasingly obvious how some native assistive technologies are becoming mainstream in their use, and this needs to be taken into consideration by designers. The Siri or Cortana voice in, voice out is an interesting one, and this is just a form of speech in and out that a lot of assistive technology users have been using for a long time. Pinch zoom is now often discussed as usability instead of accessibility, which is debatable. And turning brightness down on screens, which these days is as much to do with saving battery life as anything. Filters and brightness controls have long been used by people with visual dyslexia to reduce the effects of visual stress. It is interesting how this has become a mainstream case for supporting color contrast standards in all of our designs. If your brightness is turned down to save your battery and the user interface is low contrast, then you won't be able to use it. After these considerations, we have to think about the person. This is that place that is both usability and accessibility, and it is where I think tricks are being missed, and where accessibility becomes more about challenges related to the context of use. I worry about testing, especially mobile apps that are only tested in labs, because how many of us use our day-to-day apps sat in a lab in controlled conditions? So what I started to think about is, if I couldn't find and test with the breadth of human capability in multiple contexts, the least I could do would be to try and start finding ways I could adapt myself to emulate personal, environmental, and contextual impairment. So as a designer, I concluded that it could be useful to hack yourself, to build empathy, and to find out the right questions before you embark on more in-depth design research and testing. I'm not convinced that what I'm going to suggest is going to provide enough data to effectively support fully fledged design solutions, because nothing replaces a well-conceived design research plan. But what I think is that self-hacking at an early stage of the design process could be used to explore early stage concepts and both paper and electronic prototypes. And it could help identify potential problems and opportunities earlier on in the design process, well before you start testing with real users in real situations. This could make the whole process more efficient. It reduces the risk of rudimentary designed-in problems, and it could make the research more targeted and effective. I'm going to focus on 4 standard accessibility user groups: physical disability, vision impairment, hearing impairment, and cognitive impairment. And I'm also going to put these challenges in the context of people who experience these challenges because of their environment or situation, to show how mainstream accessibility challenges are. And this is when it starts getting into more about what my blog post was saying. We all experience physical challenge, and interfaces should support different physical challenges. And to start with, I'm going to focus on some things that are even more common than the carrying a baby impairment. Shopping. Good example would be ensuring that a mobile app works if you only have one hand free or even no hands free, depending on how successful the shopping trip has been. To add to the challenge, try testing whilst traveling on public transport. Both are using at least one hand to hold on to something. We are also on the move or are with people, which means we could be bumped around. You also don't know what hand will be available, so consideration has to be given to both left and right-handedness. And as long as you don't use a phone like my parents do, like by tapping the screen with your index finger and looking really angry at it, you'd be using it predominantly with your thumb. Are the target sizes big enough? Are there as few steps as possible to complete a task? Is there any risk of selecting things that the user doesn't want to? To emulate physical challenge whilst testing your prototypes, you could just tape your fingers together and only allow the use of one thumb. Use the prototypes when you're very cold, or you could simulate a moving crowd in a confined space. You'd need to recruit a few friends for this, but you could all try it out at the same time. If we skip back to holding the baby or pet, you could try using the device one-handed whilst holding a bag of sugar in the other. And if you're feeling really adventurous, you could use combinations such as testing while standing on a crowded, moving bus and being shaken around and holding a bag of sugar. And it will look really strange because you look like you like sugar way too much. And now that voice control is becoming mainstream, consider from day one how your product can be controlled using only your voice too. And this doesn't come with the physical challenges, but can be problematic with accents and background noises, etc. So you can be mindful and try it out in noisy public places. The next is vision accessibility. We all have times when our sight is affected, even if we don't realize we're experiencing vision impairment. I've already mentioned that people manually turn the brightness down on their phones to save battery life, but also the phones themselves have energy save modes that turn the screen brightness down. Add to that, we have to consider that mobile devices are used when we're mobile, which is not meant to be controversial. If we are outside in the bright sunlight looking at a screen with reduced brightness, we have to consider that this is a time that we need to ensure we are designing with very good color contrast. There are other examples such as non-visual interfaces when you need to be looking at something else as you are multitasking. Also, glasses wearers don't always have their glasses. Can the screen be used with mild vision impairment? And don't forget that 10% of your audience is to some degree colorblind, and that's a really big percentage of your audience. How can these or other more human-centric vision impairments be emulated? You could half close your eyes whilst the lights are on and the screen brightness is low. Is the prototype's contrast high enough to support it? Something simple for designers who wear glasses, you could try not wearing them. And if you don't need glasses, you could wear your friends. You could also emulate different eye conditions. And this can be done with coloured acetates, tape, dry markers, etc. on your own glasses, or you can hack a screen protector. Lastly, design everything in black and white or adjust the interface in the settings to black and white to ensure the design is not colour dependent. It's a really old trick that they used to use, that was used by TV companies back in the days of black and white, and they would test it when they had the earlier TV screens and they would check that it all worked in black and white. It was really cool. I would just like to point out that just like the physical accessibility tests, voice in and out is just as important here too. This is another reason why conversational interfaces have so much potential accessibility-wise. If you are someone in the development of, if you are involved in the development of a voice in and out interface, I would suggest that you go and speak to someone vision impaired or blind before you start, because they're a ready-made group of experts in audio interfaces, design and use. Next is audio accessibility. Now, our ability to hear can be compromised. The world is a really noisy place, and sometimes we can't hear because the environment drowns out the sound. Either that, or you're in a library or an open plan office where noise isn't permitted, or you're in a public space where your sound will just piss off other people. So if you can't hear, how are you going to access your content? Some people will simply suggest headphones, but the issue with those is that they also cut you off from the world. And we're sociable animals, so when we're all together wearing headphones, it means we miss out on social interactions. And it could also be unsafe if you're near busy traffic and stuff like that. If you're vision impaired, the options are limited, but I would suggest trying out bone conduction headphones. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of them by now, but they're a bit of an investment, and not everyone gets along with them. I think they're a bit strange, to be honest, but they're really useful for, I know, a lot of cyclists, so they don't get hit by cars. But if you are not vision impaired, there are other options that really should be considered by the designer so the interface could work without sound. If the app is a game or the UX is enhanced with sound, then simply use it with the sound switched off. You could even just use it whilst you're watching TV or listening to music and see how distracted you get, really. The last one I'll be talking about is cognitive accessibility, which is a subject that is still developing. And from what I've learned so far from experts such as Lena Hack and Jamie Knight, is that there is a huge crossover with rigorously applied usability practices. Cognitive conditions such as dyslexia, autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, dyspraxia, etc. make up the biggest disability audience of up to 20%. The breadth of different conditions makes requirements difficult to tie down. However, good usability and minimizing steps in tasks are often effective design goals. Jamie Knight best expresses the breadth of traits of challenges when he says, and I quote, "If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person." And one thing we can focus on are the more common transient cognitive challenges. And that could be tiredness, fatigue, alcohol, distraction, and anxiety, all of which can affect how effectively we cognitively process information. To experience this firsthand, try using your prototype after staying up really late or when you've just woken up. I know that I'm awful at waking up and I had no idea what was going on this morning. I forgot there was an election. You can use it whilst watching TV or trying to hold a conversation, which will increase cognitive load. You could even test the product or service after a few drinks or on a night out, such as booking a taxi, posting photos, or ordering a takeaway, all very important night out activities. And here is a fabulous candidate to test a prototype for cognitive accessibility. Obviously, there was free wine, and it's definitely not a picture of me at my boyfriend's uncle's wedding reception. All of these can help identify approaches to developing tests, which will begin to show how comprehensible a design is and how focused you need to be in order to use the prototype. Remember to tape everything. Note taking can be really tricky when you're tired, and especially after you've had a couple of drinks. To make things even more interesting, you could combine some of the accessibility challenges and tests, e.g. using the interface while walking along a busy street. There you have cognitive challenge as you are multitasking, physical challenge as you are moving, and sensory challenges from the environment. Now, none of these replace testing with real users, and they could ensure that your ongoing design and prototyping process has more flexibility to accommodate different users' needs. So when you do finally test with people in situations that disable them, you will get more useful insights from that exercise. Something to remember is there are already patterns out there that can vastly improve user experiences in different contexts. I'm hoping that self-hacking and the experience it gives me will help me evaluate the potential of these and many patterns in my future work. Here are a few examples. The Amazon buy it now with one click is not only a time saver, but it allows the customer to use less cognitive or motor effort during the checkout process. Another great example of cognitive usability would be the Uber app. Either you're in a rush, you're drunk, you're moving through crowds of people, you're quickly getting ready for work, and you're booking a taxi, and it can be done in only a couple of clicks. Your information, current location, destination, and all the rhymes and bank account details are already saved, so it reduces the amount of time spent trying to get your ride. Also, the drag down refresh pattern is great as it doesn't depend on one small section of the screen to be tapped or selected. So this can be found on a lot of apps like Facebook and Twitter, and it's just a massive hitbox of swiping down. It's great. I also really like the fingerprint logins on mobile and tablet applications. It takes away the need for typing and remembering login details. A similar example to this would be the autocomplete forms that can be set up on a lot of devices, eliminating the need for repetitive typing and remembering. Anything like this that reduces interaction or steps to complete a task can be beneficial. However, an example of hearing accessible popular content, such as Facebook videos and adverts, now have irritating twinkly music in the background instead of any speech. The use of subtitles in these examples are great as visual accessible content, but now they don't work at all as hearing accessible content for people with vision impairment. And this is a tricky one to understand, as the narration is already scripted and videos are being used to be narrated, but it's just one step forward and another step back. It's a really strange one. However, a good example for visual and hearing accessibility has been around the longest time, which is that all phones vibrate, and the audio feedback from the text and the app alerts and even the camera clicking sound when you take a picture. By employing these approaches, I hope as a UX designer, I will be able to better understand the temporary impairments we can all experience, and that these approaches will give me a greater understanding of how accessible my design work can be when I get my first job. And I will be available for employment from September 2018, wink, wink. Lastly, I'd just like to point out a couple of examples of companies that are tackling human-centered design in a novel way, allowing them to empathize with a greater portion of the audience that want to use their design or product. And one example, thank you Ryan, of this is Facebook's 2G Tuesdays. Facebook employees can use an app that simulates a 2G connection that millions of users around the globe have available. And this connection is much slower, and the process allows the employees to have a greater understanding on what they should do in order to improve the site's inclusivity. And another that I came across is a great example of empathetic design away from a screen. The lingerie brand Prima Donna asked all of their male employees to wear E-cut breast weights for a day so they know exactly how it feels. And it goes to show that a lot of the products we're surrounded with and use every day always have room for improvement when they are given the proper user consideration. So self-hacking isn't something that can magic bullet accessibility or usability into UX design, but what I am suggesting is that as an activity, self-hacking will give you as a UX designer a greater understanding of the usability and accessibility challenges other people face. And not only that, but the accessibility challenges you yourself face every day and perhaps don't even know it. It will enable you to quickly identify the challenges and opportunities presented by individual design patterns earlier on in the design process. That's the end of my presentation. Thanks again, everyone, for having me, and I hope what I've said is useful in any way. And if anyone has any questions for me, I'll try my very best to answer them. Thank you.
Wow, that was fantastic, Molly. Thank you so much for joining us. That was really, really great. I've been following Twitter and I haven't seen any questions yet, but it looks like most of your points have been tweeted by at least one person.
Wow.
So
that's amazing.
You've obviously dispensed quite a bit of wisdom there, I think.
Oh, well, you know, I'm very wise.
But yeah, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if you do have any questions for Molly, please tweet us at the hashtag and we'll pass them on. Oh, we might have a question.
Oh.
Let's see. Yeah, I don't see it. I'm being told there is one there. Okay, here it is. Molly has just mentioned that integrated AT is becoming mainstream. What does she think is the next big thing in this direction?
I have no idea. Obviously there's a lot of just the people talking to their devices and then talking back to them, and that's very popular right now, and I think that's going to be just developed even further. I'm not sure how. I'm not very professional with any of this. These are just like some thoughts that I've got, but if I ever think of anything, if you want to contact me and we can have a chat about something, that'll be really cool. Sorry about that.
Well, yeah, that's a good answer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so yeah, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will be back at the top of the hour with session 17. Oh, we have one more question.
Ooh.
More questions. Let's see. So, do you have any tips on how to test speech interfaces for people with speech impediments?
Oh, that's a really good. I don't know. Right, I've not thought about that. I think that would be a good one to, again, contact me, and when I'm not so nervous and flustered, then I will probably get my head in the game and I can talk to you about that. But that's a really cool point.
Great. They're both from Leonie, by the way. So, yeah, I'm sure she'd love to talk to you about it.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so anything else, Leonie? Last chance. Oh, how successful was she when testing apps on a bus?
I don't know, because I use them on the bus every single day, and I guess like I'm always just using my right hand and my thumb, and you know what, it's difficult because you find yourself like just moving everywhere and just getting completely confused. But the obviously apps that we all know, like Facebook and that, because everything, like it's like that, the refresh, the drag down refresh, things like that, where I just noticed that when you're on a bus, big screen hitboxes like that really help, because it doesn't matter what hand you're holding it with, you know, it really helps. I hope that's all right.
Makes sense. Okay. Let's see if there are any more questions. Leonie's typing.
Ooh.
Okay. Leonie suggested start a repo or something where people can contribute much more such practical ways of testing. So there's an idea.
What, a repo?
Yeah, like on GitHub or.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So yeah, that might be a good idea. We can all get involved with it.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. I say cool by everything. Everything's so cool.
Okay. I think that's everything.
Cool. Oh, getting cool.
So yeah, thanks once again.
It's cool. It's cool. Molly.
So cool, yeah, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So in about 25 minutes, we'll have Jared Smith talking about rethinking color and contrast. This will be mind-blowing, I read. So join us then at the top of the hour.
Don't you have some things to talk about, Ian? Just to fill in?
For 25 minutes?
Well, not 25 minutes, but, 10 minutes even?
I think we'll give people a break. Let them have a cup of tea or coffee.
Cup of tea. Okay. Yeah. Hot and frothy.
Yeah.
All right.
Great.
Yeah.
So we'll see you at the top of the hour. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.